Pittsburgh Golf Now's Par 4 is back. I'm Matt Gajtka along with Zach Weiss. We're talking 4 topics after the conclusion of the first and maybe only, hopefully only, fall Masters ever at Augusta National Golf Club in Augusta, Georgia. Dustin Johnson is your Masters champion, his second major. That'll be topic number 1, but we'll also get to our winners and losers. Winners beyond DJ, obviously, as he's the guy who brings home the big prize for the week. Zach, let's start at what feels like the end of the season, even though the new PGA Tour season technically started several weeks ago. In fact, it was before the U.S. Open back in mid-September. But this feels like the end to a several-month stretch here in which we saw golf be the first professional sport really to get back into the arena after the initial COVID-19 shutdown. And coincidence or not, here we are again after the Masters and after we've gotten 3 of our 4 majors in, and we're looking at more COVID cases and potentially another dark winter here. But golf, I think in a lot of ways took the forefront and took some leadership early on to show that, yeah, you can pull off some of these bigger events. And even though the Masters didn't have any fans, I was still pretty impressed to see Augusta National out of its element, but still putting on a really fun event.
Well, sure. And kind of to echo your remarks, Matt, just to everybody out there, wherever they may be watching, just hopefully everybody's safe, hopefully everybody's healthy and maintains that for whatever this stretch dry run ends up being. It was a very, very interesting year, which even in Texas had the first fans that really you've seen in golf. I know a couple of golf events outside of the PGA Tour experimented with fans, most notably on the PGA Tour Champions, but it was very interesting to see some masked fans in a controlled environment and see how that would go, and kind of how the year, in a sense, even though there was majors, it still felt like there was a build up to Augusta, even though it was in a very, very non-traditional format in every sense of the way. But Augusta, in a sense, held its own, because when you look at that leaderboard, a lot of the cream of the crop rised up to the top of that leaderboard. And it's not just Dustin Johnson, but I mean, it's very sensible that Dustin Johnson was the champion, even though he's had some high highs and Memorial was certainly a low. Of course, the COVID positive test was a low. He was able to right the ship and not use it as an excuse, but find ways to succeed when it mattered the most. And he was the most consistent golfer, even though his results were a little bit sprayed all over the place. And when it mattered at Augusta, it showed. On Sunday, when adversity finally hit him for what felt like the first time in forever, he didn't blink. He played his course familiarity. I really think with the way the Masters set up, namely with no patrons, I think it helped Dustin Johnson just get that peace of mind. It almost felt like a home game in his sense, in that extent, where it doesn't seem like Dustin Johnson's ever really fazed by too much. Even when Chambers Bay happened, oh, that sucks, but it's just golf. Golf is just a game. And by normalizing those lows, he's able to find success on the highest of highs. And this weekend was another example of that. So was this a surprise? No, it really, really wasn't. I think anybody that's seen the game has seen that. And I guess technically, since this was the overlap season, I guess this means that Dustin Johnson gets a win in 2021, which means he extends everything on a technicality. But really, the guy deserves it. You guys knocked the putting, but it seems like Dustin Johnson, when he's got the flat stick going, he's good. And really, it's not just that, but that partnership he has with his brother Austin on the golf course is something that really can't be ignored. Just the two of them plod along together. They rely on each other. There's already that ingrown trust from the sibling aspect. And being a caddy, of course, you're in very close quarters, even closer now with COVID-19. You kind of have to stick your heads together. And in a sense, you're on your own little island, so to speak. And Dustin Johnson and Austin Johnson, it's a good Johnson and Johnson team, and they were able to team up and win a green jacket. So power to them. It shows that the partnership works, and it shows that they're able to normalize things. And even though adversity hit, like I said earlier, Dustin Johnson rose through, and easily it could have gone the other way. I mean, he hasn't necessarily done well holding a multi-shot lead at the end of 3 rounds in majors, and he got that off of his back, and it really looked, for the most part, pretty elementary. So it'll be interesting to see, now that things are going to be normalized to an extent with the golf schedule, how things are going to look as the calendar year turns. But for right now, I don't think Dustin Johnson cares. It was very nice to see him display a very rare form of emotion there. Just, he's dreamt of this green jacket for so long, and finally it materialized for him. So now the sky is still the limit for Dustin Johnson. We'll just see how things go for him moving forward. But it's good to see the player that was in the most form actually deservedly win and get rewarded for that good play.
And in true DJ fashion, it doesn't really come necessarily easy in the scope of the full year. A player with prodigious talent, natural gifts, but also a guy who's worked to fill in the holes in his game. You mentioned the putting. You've seen him go to some different techniques to try to fix his alignment as he gets set up, and it looks like it has certainly paid off for him in spades. And also the wedge game. He's made huge leaps over the past 5 years, especially. From a mediocre wedge player to one of the best in the sport when it comes to controlling his distances. And so there are no holes in that game whenever he's feeling right. But as I was alluding to, it wasn't an easy season for Dustin Johnson. He came out of the gate firing. Yes, he won the Travelers Championship in Connecticut in late June. But then at the Memorial, he shot a couple of 80s. And then at the 3M Championship in Minneapolis, he shot a 78 and then withdrew with an injury. Then he had the COVID test, as you brought up. But also in the midst of that, he shot 30 under in Boston at the Northern Trust in the FedEx Cup playoffs. Then he won the FedEx Cup with a Tour Championship victory, getting that much-deserved head start that they've baked into that process now. And actually last week finished second at Houston, kind of a quiet T2 at Houston in his return from his COVID quarantine. So you said it, a guy who's in form for the most part over the course of the year, but he had to battle some tribulations and he had to get through some tough spots. So I suppose if you're going to award a 2020 champion at the end of the year, a champion golfer of the year, because we didn't really have one in terms of the Open Championship over in Great Britain. So my champion golfer of the year, and I think most would be Dustin Johnson. Does this feel like a breakthrough and maybe a chance for him to create some space between himself and his other competitors for the number one ranking and really for the unofficial ranking of best golfer in the world? Because we have Bryson DeChambeau challenging with his first major and his transformation. You have Jon Rahm nipping at his heels. He had number one for a couple of weeks this year. Justin Thomas, same deal. Both Rahm and Thomas got big wins in prestigious tournaments as well. So it's stiff competition for sure, but what do you think about the opportunity for DJ to put his stamp on next season, 2021, and maybe add one or two more major championships and perhaps establish himself as the dominant force of the new decade?
Breakthrough, I don't think would necessarily be the right word since he's won his major before already. So I would say 2016 was more that breakthrough, especially given what had happened the previous year at Chambers and just being able to answer a lot of those doubters. I mean, really, I think the bigger surprise is that you look at Dustin Johnson's major count at what it is now, and it seems very low considering that he's got such an all-round game that can really play at a lot of different courses and overcome a lot of different challenges that course designers tend to lay out in front of him. So really, do I think it's a breakthrough? I don't think so, but personally, it's going to be interesting to see how his game plays as the year turns to 2021. And is he going to play something in Hawaii? Is COVID going to really rear its head with these numbers, with everything else? And are we going to get a stoppage again? It's possible that, you know what, let's breathe a sigh of relief and let's just count our blessings that we got through this year and let the chips fall as they may moving forward. And you have to entertain that possibility. But DJ's absolutely in the driver's seat. You mentioned a lot of names. Rahm really had a chance to get some control with his round on Sunday, and he just couldn't get it going. Justin Thomas, very similarly. You could argue Rory McIlroy was trending in the right direction after overcoming the difficulties he had on Thursday, where, quite frankly, it looked like his swing was a case of mystery of who done it. So for him to get it together, although it seemed like he kind of had way too many peaks and valleys in the back, really just a lot of the contenders really were dropping off towards the end. Im was there, and then Im kind of was inconsistent. Cameron Smith was there, and then he kind of steadied. And when you're someone like Dustin Johnson, who, as you're making the turn, you're almost driving the green, which is an easy pitch and putt at that point. I mean, you just can't be making too many mistakes when you have the distance length like that. We've talked about the distance length so many times with DeChambeau, and DJ's distance is very much there. I'm sure that when even Jon Rahm's distance is there and it just didn't play, I mean, it was difficult. You still have to hit the fairways. You still have to execute your shots. And moving forward, I really think that next year could be DJ's year, but it could just be a year where he just plays good but doesn't cross the finish line. There's so many question marks, and quite frankly, it's a little bit too early just to judge everything. We'll have to see what happens with the schedule, what all gets played, what maybe gets postponed and then take it from there. But there's no reason why DJ couldn't win at least one. I mean, Augusta's a very quick turnaround this coming year, being in April. I mean, it's this last major and this one, so it's very easy to say he can just follow the same formula he did. It's going to be a very, very similar course. It's going to be just entering in season. So I don't see why Dustin Johnson couldn't repeat. And quite frankly, with it being less of a turnaround, it's going to be more on yardage books and mental memory and those kinds of things. And somebody that really pays attention to that, but doesn't really seem to care much, but still pays attention to it, would be Dustin Johnson. So, I mean, it'd be understandable if he goes back to back. So Augusta's a good place for him. And then you obviously go down the line and we'll see what happens with the rest of the majors. But could he do it? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we might be looking at a mental breakthrough, perhaps more than a physical one, for DJ, who mentioned that the number 2 was just as difficult, if not more difficult, than number 1, which, of course, we were on site for at Oakmont here in Pittsburgh in 2016. You brought that up. That was a great win. This one, a very different win on a Masters course that was a lot more vulnerable to attack. And, Zach, let's get into our winners outside of DJ for Masters Week. And for me, speaking of the golf course, I think for me it is Augusta National in general, but Fred Ridley, the chairman of Augusta National, I keep coming away impressed by him every time I see him, and such a step up for me from the previous leadership. I think that Augusta National has taken the lead, really, in terms of governing bodies, if you want to call it that, in the world of golf, the USGA, the Royal and Ancient, and of course, Augusta National has a great deal of influence. They've established the women's amateur there, not this year, of course, but that's going to be a continuing tradition. The Asian and Latin American championships on the amateur side that they have helped boost and help bankroll there. And I just think Fred really coming over from the USGA as well has more of a global perspective on the game. You heard him talking about maybe at some point we're getting to a reckoning here with the distance the golf ball is traveling, with how good equipment is. He's talking about things and addressing things that people with the USGA and the R&A seem to be dancing around more than perhaps they should. Now, the jury's out on whether any changes happen in terms of the golf ball or technology or whatever, any kind of rollback. But I just like the cut of Ridley's jib. He's a former U.S. amateur champion as well. So I like the breadth of experience that he brings to it. And it just feels like in general, he is bringing not just Augusta National, but golf into the future, perhaps kicking and screaming at times. So then you had the Lee Elder announcement for him to be the honorary starter next year at the outset of the tournament in 2021. So a lot of good things. And I think Augusta National also showed some flexibility. They could have been like the Open and said, you know what, we'll just punt it down the road. We'll see you in 2021. No, they played out of their usual season. The course wasn't as stern of a test, and also you could just tell the conditioning wasn't what they would prefer it to be at the club because it's in the fall and it's off season, quite literally, for them. But they bit the bullet. They said, you know, we'll take a little bit of maybe a slice of humble pie here. We'll look not quite as good as we usually do, and we'll still put on a great tournament and present it as well as we always do with all the online viewing options as well. So for me, the biggest winner, this might be a kind of a cop-out, but for me, the biggest winner is Fred Ridley and Augusta National.
And also to add to that point, don't forget the College Game Day was also down on the par 3 course as well. So you also, even though you didn't have a par 3 contest this year for very understandable COVID-related reasons, they still were able to utilize the par 3 course and allow patrons and fans, those that are at home, to enjoy the aspect of seeing those familiar sights. And for college football to use that as a center stage was a very, very nice touch. Fred Ridley, as you mentioned, had a great week mentioning that. I think that Jack Nicklaus is a winner this week for his press conference, where he, again, stated that there has to be the line in the sand with distance, something you mentioned with Ridley. Nicklaus has long been a proponent of doing that, and it seems like DeChambeau's finally been maybe a little bit too radical for his own good, where they're going to have to figure out some kind of either universal ball that's going to have to be put in use, because you can lengthen courses so many times, but there's only so much you can do. I mean, it almost makes what Nicklaus did driving the golf ball in his prime 300 yards even more admirable given the equipment that he was using. You can only imagine in his prime how far Nicklaus would be driving the golf ball today. it's a really an interesting sight to see. Cameron Smith has to be a winner. Just the first guy that got 4 rounds all in the 60s at Augusta National. I don't care how the course is playing. It's just a very respectable pressure. And for him to be literally breathing down Dustin Johnson's neck, regardless of how DJ played on that little stretch on the front 9, is very respectable. Cameron Smith is a guy that I think has been slept on a lot in terms of America, but he's had very good profile overseas. He did well in the tag team. What was that? The 2-man game in New Orleans. He won with Leishman overseas. I mean, definitely was a great player at the President's Cup a couple of years ago as well. So Cameron Smith really was on a great stage, other than the fact his facial hair and his hair was a little bit on the messier side. Definitely a COVID side effect there, but he really showed a lot of game, and he hung in there. It's just unfortunate for Cameron Smith that there was just somebody that just, story of almost the entire year, that just was impossible to overcome, just too much of a deficit to overcome. So Cameron Smith, very, very respectable job. What Cam was able to do is very admirable. I'm going to give Larry Mize a win. Larry Mize is a guy that probably drives the golf ball about 247 yards on a really good day. And for him to post even if he's a past champion, for him to post a -2 first round in 2020, he tied Bryson DeChambeau. I mean, the guy would have made the cut if it was just 1 round. I mean, he played well. Bernhard Langer played well for the most part. I mean, he's still impressed. I mean, some of the past champions really did well. I have to give Tiger Woods a win too. You're going to dock him for the 10, but I don't think he gets all those birdies at the end. But he handled it the right way. He joked about it to the media, which you wouldn't have seen that before with Tiger. And I think Tiger had good vibes to start the week, not just because of his best first round at Augusta, but he's normally a calculated guy where he's focused on his shot. But when Andy Ogletree, the amateur, joined him and Shane Lowry in the group, Tiger's walking down, and he made Ogletree feel at ease right away and was the champion, was the elder statesman, and embraced that role. And for Tiger Woods, it's a new role that he's still getting used to, but he embraced it. And Ogletree said later to reporters that it calmed him down. It's so easy to be intimidated as an amateur by that stage and by the fact that you're playing with the reigning Open champion. You're playing with the reigning Masters champion. And it's all a very overwhelming feel. And then, of course, the horn blows and you get all the rain delays and everything to start the first day, too, which those starts and stops can be daunting. But for Ogletree to overcome that and to win the low amateur when he was not the only amateur to make the cut, which is not always a given in a year, it's all the more respectful. And it also goes back to your point you mentioned about Ridley and the amateur. I mean, he wants the amateurs to have a good experience, and Ridley is definitely a champion of that given his background as well. So really good for Ogletree to take advantage of that as he transitions to the professional stage of his career. So definitely those guys all were winners, as was, again, Austin Johnson. I have to give a huge win to. Just, again, people doubt when you put your brother on a golf course. So you're just handing someone the clubs because it's a sibling or because they actually know what they were doing. Austin Johnson makes a lot of really, really good calls. Again, cannot be overlooked. So have to give another nod to Austin Johnson.
Yeah, Cam Smith showed out like many did. Abe Answer, you mentioned Sung Jae Im. We'll see plenty of those guys in the future. But yeah, Smith, 4 rounds in the 60s, first time ever at the Masters, as you said, and he loses by 5. That tells you what kind of week that DJ had, what kind of a scoring week it was, the lowest scoring average ever in the soft conditions. There'll be an asterisk next to that, unofficially at least, as we look to the future and try to put this 2020 Masters in perspective. Well, we gave you the winners. Just give me one loser if you can, Zach. Mine is Jon Rahm. I was up in the air between Jon Rahm and Justin Thomas because both of those young men were in position to pick off their first Masters win, and they were right there with DJ going into the weekend. It was a ton of horsepower at the top of the leaderboard, really, and that part of it was exciting when you threw in McIlroy, too, making a late charge. But Rahm and Thomas were in position, and, well, at least Justin Thomas has a major, so he can rest on that, the 2017 PGA, which is getting further and further away by the year, but you'll still give him that, and I think that can help soothe some of that disappointment. But you can just tell how badly Jon Rahm wants that first major breakthrough, and just hasn't been able to get it. And hitting some strange shots on number 8 on Saturday to shoot himself further down the leaderboard and put him way behind Dustin Johnson. That was a mess, a hole that he should probably birdie, if not have a shot at eagle. He ends up butchering that one. So that was a microcosm of his weekend for sure. And he just seems like he has all the tools. We've seen him display it in wins at the Memorial this year. He also won at Olympia Fields in Chicago in the playoff, the BMW, the FedEx Cup playoff I'm talking about. So he's got it done against some great fields. It just hasn't happened in these 4 majors. And that's why, for me, the biggest disappointment and the biggest L of the weekend is for Spain's Jon Rahm, who is knocking at the door. And he's done a lot of great things, including ascended to number 1 for a couple of weeks this summer. But he's just not quite there. He can't quite get to the finish line. DJ can certainly commiserate. Maybe Rahm can take some solace in Dustin Johnson's eventual rise to his first major several years back. But for right now, it's still pushing that boulder up the hill, and it just keeps rolling right back down on Jon Rahm.
Before I get to my golfer, which will be a very obvious pick, I'm going to touch on your pick, which I think the biggest thing that Jon Rahm can get from Dustin Johnson is to level himself upstairs. I think all of the tools are there. The games are very comparable. I think that Rahm needs to take that step that DJ's taken in putting. But I think the biggest thing is his mental game, and I think his mental game has been inconsistent. And I think that was a perfect example happened this weekend. I think that Rahm can strike the ball as well as anybody. The numbers with him and DJ are very comparable with that. But what Jon Rahm's lacking is a lack of being able to control the lows. And he's able to succeed on the highest of highs, but when that adversity hits, you can't let it affect you. And Augusta exposes you in that way where you have to be patient and you have to be smart with your shots. And when you have a caddy like Adam Hayes, who is such an elite caddy and so well respected in the game, you have perhaps one of the biggest weapons out on the golf course that's not a club. And Jon Rahm is so smart on the course, but he can be sometimes too emotional for his own good. And I think he just plain and simple got in his own head. I think with Justin Thomas, you sometimes see that shank every now and again that's a two-way miss, which I think you saw this weekend, which was the big concern, was that his misses weren't just on one side of the course, and there was just something structurally wrong with his swing that he'll go back and fix on the chopping block. But I'm erasing your question here. I'll go to answer your question. It's Mr. Par 67. It's a really, really simple case because it's one of two things. It's either Par is 67 for me. I'm going to use a 48-inch driver. I have been practicing nonstop on this course. Oh, I'm feeling dizzy. Okay, which one is it? If you have COVID symptoms, then that's one thing, that's a pass. But you also overexposed yourself in that way because you practiced way too hard. And sometimes he's just too technical for his own good. And sometimes he just overthinks things on his own good. -2 on that first round was probably the worst score he could have shot. And really, it was one of the better scores he shot the entire week. I mean, we've talked so much about the guy. And when the guy succeeds, it's so fun for golf. But when the guy fails, it is so easy to point the finger. And it's impossible not to point the finger because he set himself up for this. When you say par for me is a 67, and the course essentially is proving that a par is a 67 with the way it was playing this week, and then you're going out and shooting a 2-under, or you're blowing up holes, or you're missing it where they can't even find your golf ball because you've hit it so far and there's no one that can find it there. Because that's the one disadvantage to not having a patron, which DeChambeau absolutely, with the fascination with him, would have had a huge number of patrons. And there is no doubt about it that ball gets found within 10 seconds of it landing, regardless of the lie. Of course, someone found it after the 5 minutes were up, go figure, but that was just one shot. But he's getting a lot of hits, and rightfully so. I mean, blaming it on dizziness, I mean, you can't have it both ways. It just sounds like an excuse, regardless of whatever it is, after you said you tore the course up and you're so excited. You have to practice in a way that's good for you, but I think DeChambeau just got so excited and also felt so much pressure from all these changes he said he's going to make even after the U.S. Open win. And you look at, oh, I'm taking too many Orgain shakes. Oh, I'm putting the driver in this just so I can gain 5 miles an hour, so I can get, or 5 yards, whatever it is. There's just so much science behind him, and it's gotten him so far. But when you're over-pressuring and you're literally celebrating your U.S. Open win by traveling right away to Colorado to expand your driver, maybe it would have been just an easier idea to just do some media for a day or two, take a breath, take a week off, and then do that. But I think the minute he won that U.S. Open, the decisions he made after that set him up for failure this week. And everybody was so excited about what clubs he was hitting for a second shot after hitting these balls, but then rain came, and that neutralizes the distance a little bit. Maybe it mentally messed with him, and he had to go back to the drawing board mathematically and mentally. I mean, we'll never know, but as much as Rahm and Thomas screwed up, they at least still had a reasonable shot, and they still took home a reasonable paycheck. I think you look at it, Bryson DeChambeau was fighting just to make the cut. And really, when you look at failures, the guy that I think most people were picking, if not Dustin Johnson, was Bryson DeChambeau. And I think a lot of people lost a lot of money this weekend and probably were on their nerves because they were debating whether the guy was going to drive them nuts and they were going to take him, or if they were just saying, okay, whatever, it's a wash. And I think they finally were riding the Bryson DeChambeau train. They finally believed. And then he gave them reason again right away when the lights were on to give them doubt. Bryson DeChambeau, Mr. 67, is far and away my loser this week.
It's funny because I think par was 67 for DJ. Certainly, it sure looked like it the way he was clinically picking apart Augusta National. For Bryson, though, I agree with that last part that you said, especially about how it's been an intense year. It's been about a year since he really committed to making this transformation. It is probably time for him to have some downtime, let his body recover. There's only so much the human body can take, whether it be mentally, physically, or a combination of both. And of course, both of those aspects do tend to interplay with one another as well. So I think a lot of what ails Bryson right now is easily solvable by just taking a step back, even if it's a half step back for a month or so, heaven forbid. All right, something fun here at the end, Zach. When we go to Augusta National, of course, one of the big memories at that golf course for us golf fans is Jordan Spieth's dynamic performance there in 2015 when he tied Tiger Woods' scoring record, since surpassed this year by DJ, of course, but 18 under on a firm and fast Augusta National. Unbelievable stuff. And just his second Masters ever. Of course, his first Masters, he finished tied for second in 2014. So he was incredible right from the start there. 2016 probably should have had another one until number 11 and especially number 12 came back to bite him. A couple of balls in the water there. We were talking about Tiger with 3 in the water. Spieth hit 2 in the water. And we could say in a lot of ways he hasn't been the same since. Yes, he won the 2017 Open at Royal Birkdale with some smoke and mirrors and some vintage Spieth magic on the back nine against Matt Kuchar in that showdown. But overall, Zach, his game has just degraded to the point where he's, I think, around 80th in the world, which is hard to imagine for a guy who was number 1 just 4 years ago. But also, it looked like we had certainly a player who had staying power because of his well-rounded game. He could putt. He could hit approach shots close. He was pretty decent off the tee. And he just had a lot of short game wizardry that could help him when his game wasn't at its best. But in a lot of ways, the bottom's fallen out for Jordan Spieth. And even though he has 3 major championships, he has a U.S. Open, a Masters, both of those in 2015, and then I mentioned the Open in 17, and a couple other PGA Tour victories, he hasn't won in more than 3 years now since that Open championship win. And his good buddy Justin Thomas seems to have surpassed him in a lot of ways. JT has risen to number 1 recently this year. He has his major, and he's got 9 or 10 PGA Tour wins. He's definitely had a more consistent last few seasons than his buddy Jordan Spieth. For me, it's almost splitting hairs because I know that JT would love to get another one of those majors that Jordan Spieth has, but for me, I feel like Thomas is much more of a steady presence in the game. So if I had to pick one of them, which is the conceit here for our final shot of the par 4, I would pick Justin Thomas just because he appears to have that longevity. He has that ability, even though he has had some falterings late in tournaments this year. He's a multiple victory accumulator this season. And for me, he's just shown more of an even keel. You talked about Jon Rahm with some ups and downs, some peaks and valleys. It feels like Spieth falls victim to that too. He just cares so much that it's hard for him to detach from the result. And a lot of it's been painful to watch for me lately. I'd love to see Jordan Spieth play better, but if I had to pick one career, even with just the 1 major to 3 for Jordan, I would take JT.
For me, I mean, if you're looking at it almost like this guy won more rings than the other guy, then you have to take Spieth, right? I mean, Spieth has won between the two. Spieth has definitely had the more memorable career moment. Just that duel with Bubba, winning the green jacket and being able to handle the pressure that comes with that. You're telling such a young guy that you're the ambassador for the sport essentially for a year, because across the country and across the world, people know you as this champion. The US Open, okay, some people might not accept that. The Open Championship, some people in America probably don't stay up for that. So, I mean, universally, it has to be accepted. Spieth handled the pressure. He was a role model and in every way, but I think that what made him succeed has also maybe made him fail. And I think handling that pressure at such a young age, I think, is finally worn on him, where he feels like he needs to please everybody and do too much, and it's come down on himself harder. And he's able to put that 1 or 2 rounds together, but a year or two, that question was, can he transition it over into the weekend? And the answer was no. Even in Texas, his home state, where he was in the hunt on weekends, he just couldn't finish the deal on courses that he was semi to relatively familiar with. It became an issue. And with Spieth now, I mean, the one thing is he's been loyal to his team. He's kept his team. His caddy, Jordan Greller, has stayed. His PR agent, Jay Donzi, has stayed. You look across the board, and he's kept his team. Really, the issue now is just mentally being able to do it, because we know that he's physically capable. He's not the longest guy on tour, or he never necessarily was, but he always had the intangibles, and that made him crafty. But he's just not able to do it right now. I mean, Justin Thomas, he's won the major, but look at what major it is. It's really the major that was least regarded of all the 4 majors. So, I mean, you don't necessarily take off points, but when you look at it, I mean, it's almost like Jordan's won 2 majors and Justin's won half of a major. I mean, PGA Championship isn't necessarily, I mean, no offense to the PGA of America, but you think about the Masters, you know the pride people take in winning the Open Championship, and you know the pride people take in winning the U.S. Open. Oftentimes, that's the toughest layout of the pros see all year, regardless of fairness or not. So you look at it that way. What Thomas has done well is he's also been loyal. He's kept Jimmy Johnson as his caddy. Jimmy Johnson was a very, very key part to Steve Stricker's resurgence on the PGA Tour when that happened. Justin Thomas has been pretty consistent with his game, as you mentioned. He doesn't necessarily have a glaring weakness, although he's not necessarily the best in any one statistic. He just has a really good all-round game and a really sharp mental game that's held throughout. And he also, I think, had the blessing of Jordan getting off to that fast start, where he could kind of be in the shadow and he could be Jordan's friend, he could be the golden child's friend and all of that, and not necessarily get as much media attention. If he did, maybe it's just oh, what's it like being Jordan's friend, and just plodding along, getting top tens and backdooring his way into contention. But now it almost seems like the roles, as you said, have reversed. Even a couple years ago at Memorial, he was #1 or pretty darn close to it. He's been flirting with it. I mean, like you said, he's a 2 or 3 win a guy, bare minimum a year. And I think to an extent he's hard on himself too, but I think he responds better to it than what Jordan does. And I think Jordan's mentality is more of self-doubt, which is so tough to see, because golf is such a lonely sport. And when you don't do well, it becomes even lonelier. And now that you're adding COVID into that, it just makes it a dark, toxic place. And I mean, it's not for a lack of trying. I mean, Jordan's done just about everything he can do. But I mean, you can't write Jordan off either, because I mean, you wrote Stuart Sink off. Look what he did. You write off all these Cinderella guys, and anybody on any given week can have that week. And I think Jordan just needs to have that week again where it all comes back and it all clicks. And I think when that happens, then he'll become very, very dangerous again. He can drive the ball, 290, 300, which he'll play. The iron plays fine. It's nothing special anymore. And the putting is what it is. It's not as good as it used to be, but I mean, I think he's relied on the putter to bail him out at times, and you just can't do that anymore. And it's a shame. I mean, there's just so many putters that have maybe gone over him. I think that it's tough to guess what Thomas's staying power is, because you've already seen the next generation already take over. Matthew Wolff has flirted so many times. Colin Morikawa is already a major champion, and a lot of eyes are on him. And who's to say somebody like an Andy Ogletree or some of these other guys that are coming out. I mean, there's just so much competition. There's so much depth in the PGA Tour, maybe now more than ever. I mean, when Nicklaus was there, you had a few guys, but it wasn't necessarily like this. You have guys that are doing it their own way now, that are finding ways to succeed. There's not one necessarily pipeline to the PGA Tour. This golfer finds success, and that's what makes it fun. It's not you're going to get guys like Dustin Johnson, guys like Koepka that can contend every week and win, but you're also going to get the guys that, wait, how the heck did they get here? I don't think anybody necessarily had Abraham Answer this weekend doing well, but his first 3 rounds were in the 60s and has a good game, has a great caddy that he's maintained a relationship with since right before the web.com at the time tour came in. And that goes a long way because it makes you comfortable. Great short game player, fantastic out of bunkers, doesn't make too many big mistakes. And that plays, especially in a major setting. So personally, I think Tom, and they're only separated, even though Spieth was more prolific with most of his career in terms of major wins, they're only separated by a couple $1 million, not to mention, I mean, Spieth has the Under Armour endorsement, but of course, Justin Thomas was just on a video game cover. Justin Thomas has the Polo Ralph Lauren. And I think Justin Thomas is a much more clutch player when it comes to team settings. Of course, he's much better in the singles department. Tiger Woods has no problem playing with him in a President's or a Ryder Cup setting. And there's something about that to say. And it's not just mental makeup as well. I mean, I think that Jordan Spieth is a little more quiet, reserved. He's got that steely confidence. But Justin Thomas brings out the best in his teammates as well as himself, too. And there's a lot to be said about that. Justin Thomas is more of that natural leader now because he believes in himself. And quite frankly, Spieth is just not at that point right now. It's a very interesting topic, and it's one of the few that I've actually posed to Matt that I've actually made the show. So small little pat on the back there. But, I mean, it's definitely a conversation worth having because Spieth has had the more prolific career if you look at majors. I mean, definitely won, and the way he's won some games, holding out of the bunker at John Deere, doing the same in a playoff a couple years later in another event. I mean, some very memorable wins, and Jordan Spieth was, I think a lot of people thought he was going to be that Tiger Woods that was going to get these young kids interested, and he did, and then he stopped. And, I mean, there's a lot of pressures that come into it. I personally hope he gets back because it'd be great for the game. But I think, you know, having that issue and sometimes taking it out on fans, his pace of play has been a little bit slower, which also mentions the mental. When he gets into contention, he slows down a little bit more too. So I think there's just a lot of things that he has to work on, and we all just wish for the best. I think the sport is better when Jordan Spieth is in contention and winning. So just hopefully the two friends can be 1 and 2 on a leaderboard here and have a Sunday showdown here pretty soon. Because really for golf, that's all you can ask for.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the fact that Jordan Spieth has more worldwide renown. You would think he's more of a celebrity golfer, and I think overall, if you look at their entire careers, it's a much closer call than it appears right now. If you're asking me who's the better golfer right now, it's Justin Thomas, and it's not even close. But when you look at Spieth's ability to break through at such a young age, I completely agree with you that golf is better when he's in contention just because he gets more eyeballs on it. And maybe Thomas rises to that level at some point. Maybe he does start to chip away and carve out his own niche for himself. And he has plenty of fans, obviously, not to say that he doesn't, but it's not quite that same level of cachet, that Q rating that Jordan Spieth has. So we're all pulling for Jordan, I think, for the most part, if not everybody, most people are. And we'll get a chance to wipe the slate clean and come back for another Masters. Already going to be 6 years since his seminal triumph there once we reconvene at Augusta National, knock on wood, hopefully, in April. Zach, the year has been odd, obviously, but thank you so much for joining me for all these Par 4 videos over the course of 2020. Ever since the restart in June, we've had, I think, 6 or 7 episodes. That's been fun here on the Par 4 on Pittsburgh Golf Now. We look forward to more of that in the new year. I know that you and I are trying to squeeze in some off-season rounds as well. I know most of our viewers out there are also avid golfers. So, hey, this week's looking pretty good too, if you want to get out to the links. And also hit us up with ideas for future editions of the Par 4. We'd love to have your input and just what you think about what we've talked about here, in addition to ideas for coverage of the local scene on PittsburghGolfNow.com. Zach, I'll be seeing you. You're on the road here. You're in eastern Pennsylvania, but I'll be catching you. Hopefully another round at the Bob, perhaps, before before we get back to it and start talking about major championships again in the springtime.
That sounds great, Matt. Hopefully, if we don't get a chance to talk to our viewership and readership, hopefully everybody has a happy, healthy Thanksgiving, whatever holiday they celebrate between Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Boxing Day, all of that, and a happy, healthy new year. Hopefully 2021 treats you better than whatever this year's been.
Yeah, exactly. Well, golf has persevered and in some cases thrived, and I just think seeing the Masters in the fall, a pretty fitting conclusion for a year that has thrown us all for a loop. It was enjoyable, but also quite odd, I will say that much. And like I said at the top, hopefully it's the only time that we see the Masters play in the fall. For Zach Weiss, I'm Matt Gajtka, saying goodbye for 2020 on the PGN Par 4.
Support your local golf courses, guys.